And hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Bean. I graduated, I feel so old comparatively. I graduated from the college in 2009 with a degree in psychology. I worked at Georgetown for a couple years in a research lab before going to graduate school at Johns Hopkins. I did a joint master's in public health MBA program there. And I've been working in consulting for a little over 7 years now. I've been at a number of firms. Most recently at IQVIA, where I also previously worked. So I have about 2.5 years of experience there. And for those of you who might not be familiar, IQVIA is a Fortune 500 global healthcare company with many different groups. We run clinical trials. We're actually running one of the COVID vaccine trials right now. We have a data arm, and then I work in our commercial arm where we do consulting services for life sciences or pharmaceutical clients. All right, so just to start, Jody thought it would be helpful to kind of give an overview of consulting and the types of firms that are out there. I know for me, it was as a graduate student, but it was hard to kind of discern who does what and what makes, you know, McKinsey different from Deloitte, different from a IQVIA, a smaller healthcare group. So I think generally when we're thinking about consulting firms, you can break them down into 4 categories. So you have management consultancies, and these are organizations that are focusing on business problems and are providing organizational advice for their clients. Then you have strategic consultancies. These are sort of folks providing the highest level of expertise and guidance. So they're helping companies to think about their most challenging strategic questions and provide guidance for their clients in terms of next steps. You also have political or economic consultancies. These are more specialized groups. So political consultancies are generally thinking about interfacing with the government. Certainly in the realm that I'm in, which is pharmaceuticals, there are many political consultancies that provide feedback to you know, the big pharma companies about how they should lobby and think about supporting different political candidates. And then there are economic consultancies, which tend to be fairly academic, and they're usually applying economic research principles to the work that they're doing. And then the last bucket would be IT consultancies, and these are groups that are really focused on the development and application of IT within a company. I think it's important to note these distinctions are not very clear. You're going to likely see that consultancies often do a little bit of work all over, and the groups are usually not mutually exclusive. So you could even be on a project where you're doing some work that's strategic, and then maybe something that's more implementation focused that's thinking about the organization, so maybe falls more under the management consulting umbrella. The other big distinction I think it's important for folks to think about as they're thinking about a career in consulting is travel model. So right now, the travel model is pretty simple. None of us are going anywhere. We're all working at home. You know, I do know some people who have gone back into the office, but generally speaking, right now, you know, our living rooms are our offices, and we're making do. But in consulting, there are firms whose model is, or model has the team on site. So generally, that means you would, you know, fly out or take a train every Sunday night or Monday and then return home every Thursday or Friday. There are some great benefits to that. We can talk about that later on, but that means you are away from home for most of the week. On the flip side, there are folks who don't travel at all. So do one other end. I think that's actually kind of rare. And I think where a lot of consultants fall is somewhere in the middle, where you're traveling a few times a month, you know, for particularly important client meetings or to do interviews or other things that require in-person contact. So that's something to think about before you sign on the dotted line, you know, because it certainly does impact your lifestyle. More so than, you know, your friends who might have a quote unquote normal job where they're going home every evening. And then the other thing I just wanted to cover in terms of healthcare consulting is I think generally speaking, you can kind of break it down into 2 buckets. So you have pharma or life sciences, and then what I think falls under the broader healthcare umbrella, which is focusing on consulting for providers, so hospitals, physician groups, payers, so both depending on whether you're focused in the U.S. or globally. You know, in the U.S. we have government payers, Medicare and Medicaid, but we also have many, many, many private payers, your Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, all that. So they certainly are large consumers of consulting services. And then the last thing I wanted to cover is just sort of, why do consultants exist? I get this question a lot, which is like, why do your clients need you? And so as I've had a few years under my belt now to kind of reflect on this, generally, clients need consultants for a select number of reasons. So one is that they have a problem that they don't have the capabilities internally to solve. So it's something really challenging that they've maybe taken a pass at and haven't found a solution that works. So they're looking for someone else who can think differently, maybe has a different background, skill set, experience to apply to their problem. They also often have changes that need to be made that from an optics perspective, it's better for that change to be made by someone else. So you could imagine a very probably simple example around like reorganizing a group. It looks better and it helps to maintain culture and relationships internally if someone out from the outside comes in and says, well, you need to do this now. I know your old job was over here, but we're going to move you here, or in worst case scenario, fire you. So that sometimes there's an image or a perception issue that it makes it easier for external forces to make changes. The other thing is that very often there just aren't enough hands to solve all the problems within a company. And consultants are sort of temporary ways to increase your workforce without hiring someone and committing to employing them over the longer term. So consultants often step in when there's a temporary need to address a problem, or maybe a short-term need to staff some sort of group, and that allows a firm to do without having to hire more heads. So those are the major things I wanted to cover. I don't know if the other panelists have anything to add before we move on.
Yeah, that was really comprehensive. Thank you.
Yeah, not much to add other than, like you said, it doesn't always fit into the perfect bucket. So, just be aware of that those are the general kind of like guiding things, but definitely it does not fit perfectly into any of those buckets. And there's a lot of overlap, as Stephanie said.
And one more somewhat random point that maybe doesn't fit with these topics, but Jody mentioned at the beginning that some of you might be considering consulting as a gap year, particularly before medical school. This is very, very common. In fact, in all my years of consulting, I feel like 9 out of 10 people I meet either had pre-med aspirations at one point and went to consulting with the hope of going to med school, or decided to stay. So it's a very common path. I would just say, for those of you who are considering it, make sure you have conversations throughout the interview process around that. Again, it's something that's very common, but there are a lot of firms that have stipulations around how many years you need to stay. A lot of firms are requiring 2 years. So I think just being upfront and honest is really the best way about it. Relationships are just really, really important in any career, and so you want to make sure that you're maintaining those over the longer term.
You actually took one of my questions, because I get that a lot. Of course, the consulting turnover is expected, but does a company really want to hire somebody that they know wants to go to medical school in a year or two? And so do they bring this up in the interview? That was one of my questions. So you're saying, yes, have the conversation. Reza and Kylie, would you say the same?
I would say the same. I think there's been a lot of people at my firm that maybe not medical school, but have wanted to go to law school. And I think they were upfront about that in their interview process. So I definitely think it is important to be upfront about it. I don't think it necessarily will, change if it's, a year or two out. I think you'll still be considered for the job. So definitely, I think being upfront is probably the best policy.
Yeah, I would agree. I've heard horror stories of, folks who are in their interview says, oh, I have this long-term aspiration. And then, they're told, hey, if that's, you want to leave already, why even start? I think that really depends on the culture of the organization. I even had one of the senior leaders in the company at Lewin, ask, hey, what are you planning to do? Are you thinking about grad school? The company can maybe provide assistance. If so, I thought that was really great. I wasn't even expecting to have that type of conversation. I think, if your firm, you can find a firm that has that type of culture, where they can even, encourage you to, grow your career. I think, without trying to kind of retain you and say you have to stay here. I think that's also really good to look for.
Great. Reza, since you were just talking, do you want to start us off and just share like a sample project? What does a day-to-day really look like? What does a project look like? What's your role on that? And then you could also share more about your organization in terms of travel, career progression, and recruiting timelines.
Sure. Yeah. So Lewin, the type of consulting kind of that Lewin falls into is part of that, management and part of that kind of strategic aspect of consulting. The primary clients for the Lewin Group are federal facing. So the federal government, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, the Veterans Administration. Lewin also has a huge, analytics and data component. I'm not too involved in that aspect. I focus more on implementation. So one, example of a contract with, Lewin Group and CMS would be the Maryland Primary Care Program, which is implementing or analyzing primary care within the state of Maryland. And then the government says, okay, we want you to, analyze what are the metrics and then create a plan to address this. So part of that is educating primary care providers, right? How can you, reimagine your business, reimagine the way you provide care in order to be more efficient, or in order to integrate behavioral health, or in order to make you better use of data or IT to inform your decision-making process. So really anything that is, analyzing and maybe, implementing some type of program is what I would, consider really the bulk of a lot of the work that Lewin does. So my role, I'm a senior research analyst. So that's, our senior research analysts and research consultants are kind of those level 2 and 3s at the firm. We will be responsible for anything, for writing, research, project management work. I've also been, had the opportunity to actually go out into the state of Maryland and interview practices, right? Interview clinical practices and, compile best practices. Say, what are the strategies you are doing in order to transform the way you provide care to patients? And part of that is, doing that data analysis. Part of it is just, collecting that qualitative data, saying, hey, what are those strategies? And those interviews, that research fuels into several different products. That can look like a spotlight, that can be a webinar, that can be, that 100-page document when you Google a government program and, and you find out a 100-page document. We'll do, a variety of those things, or, anything else the government is looking for. Another project that I was, particularly excited to work on was for the Veterans Administration, for the Community Care Network. So effectively what the VA was doing is they are taking hospitals and, normal physicians and, converting them or translating them into hospitals or physicians that would be able to provide for veterans. So the task that Lewin was responsible for was creating a database, a program to take in a lot of different sources of data and analyze whether or not these physicians or these hospitals reach a certain benchmark in order to qualify for that. So that was creating a database that involved doing research and analyzing what are these benchmarks that we need to look for. And it also had to do, working with different, groups of people across the country. One of the reasons I chose Lewin was because I didn't want to do a whole lot of traveling. And because Lewin primarily works for the federal government, they're based in Baltimore and DC. I have colleagues that go to California and, go to Chicago. Lewin doesn't do as much traveling as I think your typical, Sunday to Thursday consultant would. And that's because, the type of work they do and the location of their client. And that works better for me. My family's from Maryland. So, I would prefer to be with them rather than travel. So definitely to each their own. I don't think there's a right, course of action. Was there anything else that I should talk on?
Maybe I would say the timeline, the students get pretty anxious about when consulting firms are hiring.
Yeah.
Right now, it's right now, but I know not all are like that. So you could share your recruiting timeline.
Yeah. So I actually found out about Lewin from one of the not consulting, the healthcare fairs. So one thing that's nice about Lewin is you don't have to apply, 3 months before. You don't have to have an internship before to get a job at the Lewin Group. Generally, they're hiring for the next academic year up until end of December. I think I like had my interview like right after Thanksgiving. The interview process for Lewin, it's like a 3-part interview. Part of it's like a writing assessment, qualitative, quantitative interview, and some other personal, interviews that they have. We don't really rely on case interviews, the traditional style of case interviewing. I like that. Some people really like the case interviews, more power to them. That wasn't the route I wanted to take. But I don't have the exact dates on hand, but I know if you go to the website, you can find info about Lewin. I know a lot of folks stress about, I didn't get an internship my junior year and I'm a senior now and I'm late. There's definitely a lot of firms that don't have those very extended timelines. Like I said, I didn't even know about Lewin until, October of my senior year. So, I was stressing way before it. So I know a lot of folks may fall into that boat. And there's a lot of firms that, have opportunities that you don't have to have, experience a whole, year in advance for. So I would look around and shop, see what firm kind of matches your culture, the type of work you want to do, and kind of that long-term, career development as well.
Great, thank you. And we do have a question. Are most of the applications available through Handshake? And I will say all 3 of your organizations do recruit on Handshake. So I can answer that question. Kylie, do you want to share your day-to-day and some sample projects?
Sure. So I think Adler probably falls more on the strategic and political consultancy side. I'd say we're a little bit different than other healthcare consulting firms. We kind of do things across all of the healthcare industry. We have different practice groups that work with many different clients. So we work with healthcare providers, we work with health plans, we work with pharma companies, which I would say is probably the majority of our revenue and work, just because the pharma companies do have the money to pay consultants. But we work with a ton of different clients, patient groups, trade organizations. So really across the spectrum of industry, which is really nice that you get a really wide client base. I'm in the policy practice specifically. So Adler has different practices. We have the policy practice, we have a market access practice that focuses more on market access approaches for clients' products. So those are more dealing with the pharma companies, helping them apply for codes to get their products reimbursed, helping get their products through FDA approval, helping post-market launch, and those types of market access considerations. We also have a group that's focused more on the financial services side, so more on like Wall Street, private equity deals and acquisitions. And then we also have a healthcare transformation group, which is more focused on the provider payment models and that type of thing. So definitely a wide range of opportunities. I'm on the policy side, so my day-to-day is focused more on the policy and political aspects of things, but we do a wide range of work just within our practice. So I would say it's kind of a range between the nuts and bolts of policy tracking and analysis. So any type of legislation or regulation that is released, we are on top of it, tracking it, doing summaries for our clients. And then we also do a lot of business strategy work. So kind of looking at all the policy options that are being considered on Capitol Hill or by the administration, and kind of helping clients assess those policy solutions, those policy considerations, how it would impact their business, and kind of coming up with new solutions as well that are maybe not being considered to date. And then we also do a lot of analytics work as well. So we do have also a wide range of data sources that we use. We do a lot of policy modeling, so kind of estimating the impact of proposals that come out for different policies, as well as just different claims analysis with Medicare or Medicaid data as well. So kind of definitely a range of things. I'm a senior associate in the policy practice, and at my level, my day-to-day is never the same. I'm also I'm on probably 7 to 10 different projects or different clients all at once. So I think that's a little bit different than some consulting firms where you might be on, you know, 1 or 2 projects for, you know, months or even years. So that's kind of different, where I'm on multiple clients, multiple projects all at once, which I personally like because the day-to-day is really never the same. And as kind of like a junior and mid-level staff, I am responsible for both the project management side of things, as well as also just kind of, you know, the day-to-day, you know, making deliverables, doing the PowerPoints, doing the background research, putting together memos, but also, you know, day-to-day contact with clients and making sure that projects are on timeline, and we can deliver them to clients. So yeah, definitely a lot of different things going on at once, and you need to be really organized, but it's definitely something that I enjoy because, you know, the day-to-day is never really the same. As far as travel goes, I do not personally travel a ton. I think it really depends on the type of projects that you're on at the time for my company. So you know, there are some people that do travel a good amount. Those are more of the people that are more client facing, that are traveling to get new business. So we have a specific practice group that's focused on just, you know, getting new business and new clients. So those are the people that travel a lot. But for the typical person at my company, I would say it really depends on certain projects. If you're on a project where there's an in-person readout, then you're going to be traveling to the client site. But in general, you're not traveling, you know, like Thursday through Monday or whatever. Yeah, it really just depends on the project, and if you have a deliverable that's due that you need to go to the client in person. And then I think for recruiting timeline, I'm not sure if it has changed. I came into Avalere as part of the Associate Immersion Program, which is a specific program that we have for students that are straight out of undergrad or grad school. And it's really a program to help students get kind of acclimated to Avalere, because we have so many different practice areas and different things that we do. It really helps people discover the different opportunities at Adler and which practice they might want to go into. So when I came in, it was a year-long program, but now it is a 6-month program. And we have actually started to hire both for a January class and I believe it's like August class, although I think this year it was pushed out a little bit because of COVID. So there are 2 actual opportunities to join that immersion class. I know they recently just moved up the timeline for that because they were missing out on some students that were interested in kind of general consulting. So they did move up the timeline for that. So I believe the recruiting cycle is probably beginning soon. But I will check back in on that. And also we do put out the post publicly. So you can definitely just follow Adler on Glassdoor or whatever other recruiting site you use, and we'll release the dates for the applications.
I can save you a to-do. So your application is not up yet, but AvalereHealth is giving an info session in mid-October. So likely it will come soon.
Yep.
I also put a link for everybody. Avalere Insights, AvalereHealth has a great website. It's your insight page that really gives a nice idea of what projects you do. So it can dive a little deeper into the types of work that you do on that page. Okay, and then I'll answer there's a few other questions. I'm going to wait on those. Stephanie, do you want to share more about your work?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I currently work at IQVIA, kind of a bizarre name. It's IQVIA. 90% of people say it wrong. So Jody, kudos to you for getting it right. But our company is, as I said, it's quite large. Our consulting group is honestly just kind of a drop in the larger bucket of our organization. But one of the things that brought me to IQVIA, and I've worked at other smaller firms. I worked at Analysis Group, which is an economic consulting firm. I most recently worked at Clearview Healthcare Partners, which is a boutique life sciences consultancy. But IQVIA, one of the things that I love about working there is that we are so big and we're doing so much. And so in many ways, our consulting group is kind of the tip of the spear. And when I say that, what I mean is that we will engage with clients, and I should say all of our clients are in the pharmaceutical, biotech, life sciences space. We'll work with our clients on something, and then a big part of what we do is help connect them to other parts of our organization, and then we get to kind of see the bigger picture at play. And I can give an example of that, but it's really neat. We have thousands of medical doctors. So as a consultant, I can very easily get the type of clinical detail I need pretty readily. So that's not to say working in an enormous organization doesn't have its challenges, but it certainly does help us from a consulting perspective. In terms of my role, the way, I'm sure you guys have, when you're hearing about consulting firms, right, some entry levels are associates, some are analysts. There's a lot of, differentiation in titles. And so the way that I generally think about consulting firms and progression is there are the doers, sort of the younger folks who are doing the research, putting slides together. Then there are people who manage and they oversee multiple projects, make sure clients are happy, keep timelines. And then there are the people who sell. And so generally throughout your career, you're going to be transitioning. It's not going to be a clean cut. You're not going to stop doing and then start managing, but those are sort of how your responsibilities build. And so for me, I'm sort of sit between managing and selling right now. So I oversee, probably 10 to 15 projects at a time, but then I also spend a significant amount of my time thinking about how do we develop relationships with clients, both old and new, to bring in new work. And then I also, as part of my role, spend a significant amount of time thinking about how do we be more innovative in our offerings. So I actually spend a fair amount of time on business development about our consulting group, which is kind of unique, and I enjoy that quite a bit. In terms of my, sort of day-to-day, kind of like Kylie, no 2 days look the same. I spend a lot of time on the phone with clients, either, talking to them about their concerns and things that they're worried about in the future and how we can help them kind of prepare for those, sharing project insights with them, managing teams. I spend a fair amount of time working on training and development. And then, as I mentioned, thinking about internally, how do we develop as a group to be more competitive in our space? What that boils down to is a lot of time on the phone, a lot of emails, and a lot of PowerPoint slides. So those are sort of the main things that I work on. Travel is up and down. Obviously, right now we're all at home. I've had years of, 150 plus nights in a hotel. I've also had years where, it's every other month. It really depends on the clients. And I think, Reza, you mentioned this, but one of the big things to think about is where is your firm, or more specifically, the office you want to work in, how is it located to a majority of your clients? So in my case, working in pharmaceuticals, there are 3 big hubs. There's a hub in New Jersey, there's a hub up in Cambridge and Boston, and then there's a hub in San Francisco. And so most people who do work in this space have offices in those areas. And so for me, I'm based in New York City. I have a lot of clients in New Jersey. So travel is, getting on a train and going out there for the day. It's not as onerous as flying cross country. So I personally like that. I couldn't do the Sunday to Thursday. It's definitely a grind. In terms of types of projects, my firm really offers end-to-end services for life sciences. So we support research and development, planning clinical trials, designing them, working with the FDA. We support launching new products. We support pricing and market access, which is, so after you get approval, how do we get insurance companies to pay for it? We do more strategic work. So I've done projects where I had a client basically say, I have $500,000 to invest. What therapeutic area should I go into? They were really strong in oncology. They wanted to know, do we target rare disease or heart or cardiovascular? So those are sort of the big picture type projects that we also do. The one project for me that I think represents my experience at IQVIA very well is one that I worked on around a clinical trial. So my client had this very small biotech. They had one drug that they were trying to bring to the market, and they went to the FDA, and the FDA said, we don't like your trial. We don't like how you designed it. What you're going to measure is not meaningful to patients. And so I spent the summer of 2017 flying around the U.S. interviewing patients pediatric patients, so children who had a very rare kidney disease, and designing a questionnaire that captured some of the key things that they experienced as a result of this disease. And the client actually decided to use that questionnaire as in their trial to decide whether the drug worked or not. And they recently announced that their drug met its primary endpoint. So using that questionnaire to measure change, it was shown that the drug worked. So we're now working with them to think about launch, but it's been really neat to work to bring something to market where there's a real need for patients, and you're actually changing, lives at the end of the day. I'm trying to think if there are other, applications to my company. So Jody mentioned, I guess we recruit at Georgetown, so the timeline should be available there. We have a lot of different positions. Again, our company has so many different functional areas, so just make sure to focus on consulting. And I think, their timelines are usually pretty much in line with the other consulting firms. And our interview process does have a case interview. It's not as scary as it sounds, but then some behavioral components as well. It's actually a nice process. You get to know, there's a few rounds, and so you get to get a sense of what the culture is and talk with some different folks to get their perspective as well.
Great, and I can tell you that your positions are on Handshake, and the date is October 23rd. So it's there. So thank you all. This was really helpful to hear about the different projects. So let's move on to the next portion of the talk, which is how do I stand out? And so we've got 3 questions that all relate to that. So one is, does my major matter? What particular classes can I be taking? And we also have an MBA student, but this would also be for somebody in the college. Do I need to show some kind of healthcare experience or interest in healthcare? Would that make me more attractive? So if somebody could start answering that question, just how can they stand out in terms of major classes and healthcare experience, and then of course other things.
Sure, I can go ahead if nobody else wants to start. And this is obviously unique to me. I don't want to speak for anybody else. I think one of the beauties of consulting is that you have people from every different background. So the person sitting next to me, or when we were in the office, was a microbiology major. The other person on my other side was public policy. And then I'm here kind of stuck in the middle with healthcare management, right, from a business perspective. And the 3 of us working together on one task or one, goal. So I think that is really perspective. So, I wouldn't say, I don't have a healthcare major, therefore, I should not apply. But when I interview individuals for Lewin, we ask the question, why Lewin? Why healthcare consulting? There's so many different types of consulting. So I think, generally having an idea of how the healthcare system works is great, but for the most part, they'll teach you a lot of the things that you don't know. But ultimately, I think you should have an answer to why do I want to work in healthcare consulting when there's so many other types of consulting. So that it could be, I took this really cool class and it's really interesting, or it could be, I had this life-changing moment. I mean, anything I think in between will, suffice. But having that answer, I think, is really important to why healthcare versus, financial consulting or another type of consulting.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, at least from what I've seen in the past few cycles for the immersion program at my company, they have been more focused on looking at resumes because we've been getting so many applicants on looking at resumes that do have demonstrated interest in healthcare. So I think that is important. That being said, we do have people that come in from different backgrounds, whether that's more of a clinical, pre-med perspective, or more on the policy side. So definitely we take people from all backgrounds, but having a demonstrated interest in healthcare is important because, to Reza's point, we do ask, why Adler, why healthcare consulting, and I think being able to speak to some sort of healthcare experience that you've had, and whether that's an internship or just, work in a classroom, is really important during an interview. We do not have case interviews either. We just have multiple interviews with people from across the firm. So being able to just have a conversation with people about, your healthcare experience and why you want to go into this field is really important.
Yeah, I'll add, I think for the life sciences space in particular, having some scientific background is helpful. you will likely have to dive into the science a little bit, read some journal articles, try to extract, information from studies and things like that. And so that's not to say that you can't learn to do it, but I do think that folks who have exposure to that often just have a less steep learning curve. And there certainly are firms, I mentioned I recently worked at Clearview Healthcare Partners. They heavily weight scientific background. They are a firm that is like very deep in the science. They have a lot of PhDs. So some of it really just depends on the nature or characteristics of the firm. But I think both Kylie and Reza, that point around making sure that you demonstrate that you're interested is really important. And so the one thing I always recommend is, you might not have the coursework in the area, and I think that's fine. I think a diversity of thought is actually really important for a good consultancy. But what can you do to learn about the industry and learn about what's going on beforehand? So I'm not saying spend hours, but like start reading the health section of the New York Times. There's a website called Fierce Pharma, and there's like Fierce Biotech. There's like they have a million different variations on that theme. But sign up for their newsletter and just read the headlines and have a sense of what's going on. Certainly right now, healthcare is at the forefront for everyone. So it's kind of hard to actually not be tracking a lot of how the health system is coping with this pandemic. So that's even a great topic. But I think being armed with a couple of things that interest you, really just helps you to stand out in the interview process. So again, not necessary, but it can be a way to differentiate yourself, just to show that, your interest is real. You've taken the time to actually invest and learn a little bit more.
What about in terms of, I've got a student here who has a stats background or like any data analysis, of course, like presentation leadership, like what about some of those kinds of skills?
I would say that an analytical background is actually a huge benefit. That's not saying that you necessarily need to know how to use SAS and run complicated analyses, but being able to think about data and potentially communicate with a programmer, depending on how your firm is set up, I think is really helpful. Most of the work that I do tends to be relatively data driven, and I think that's where the industry is going more broadly. So, again, being able to think about that is important. Presentation skills, absolutely. I mean, it would be, if you have really strong PowerPoint skills, like you're definitely, you have a leg up, but I don't think the expectation is that you would have that, particularly coming out of undergrad. But I think broadly being able to communicate well is very important. So, is there anything that you've done that shows that you can write really well? And certainly verbal communication is something that comes across during the interview, so that's somewhat easy to assess. But, I tell folks that if you do have specific skill sets, if you're very, very comfortable in Excel, highlight that, because those are things that are very tangible for a consulting firm to be able to grab onto and kind of leverage you pretty quickly when you do start.
Yeah, I would say from my experience, having an analytical background is definitely a leg up. It's something that I actually wish I had more of that I did at Georgetown. But even just being able to understand data and also take it from, I'm not directly the one that's doing the SAS programming or doing the modeling, but I am taking the kind of raw data outputs and translating them in language that, the average person can understand. So being able to just take data and understand it is really important. But definitely those, if you have like SAS programming or analytical skills, I think those are things that will definitely stand out for any company. And then, yeah, as Stephanie said, definitely presentation skills as well. And just overall communication, analytical writing, that type of thing.
To echo everyone else, I mean, I think those are all spot on. I know Lewin makes a really big emphasis on data-informed decision-making. So saying that, hey, I might not be able to, compile these numbers, but I can, create a plan of action based on it, right? Or if you give me a set of information, I can do something for it. I can create a plan, I can communicate that plan, I can execute that plan. That's what I think what they really want to see. Like, I don't have the super technical background, but I can tell you, okay, if you do tell me this, I can synthesize it and give a few recommendations. So I think if you don't have that technical skill, being able to demonstrate that you can supplement it with everything else. But if you have that technical skill, like Stephanie said, if you know Excel, Stata, R, like, highlight that on the resume, because that's definitely a big star, especially for a lot of, firms that are going to be implementing programs. They would love to see that. I think like Lewin, gosh, I think like a third or a fourth of folks are very much, stats and data and economic driven, team members that really, the majority of their time focus on that.
And just to, a quick plug for consulting broadly, having, now worked in consulting for a number of years, I liken consulting years to dog years in the sense that you learn so much and you are exposed to so much. And I would argue, having, many, many friends in different industries, that I don't know that there are companies outside of consulting who do a better job training new hires. And so I think that's one of the strongest, to me, benefits of starting your career in consulting, is that you're going to if you choose to walk away, which many people do, there is a lot of churn. You're going to walk away with a really strong set of skills that, I've had experience going to interview for jobs in the pharmaceutical industry, and they're putting me on par with people who have maybe a half or 2 or 3 times as many years of experience as I do, because they really overweight the consulting experience. So where you feel like you might not have the skills to do a consulting project, know that, every firm I have ever worked for or known someone who's worked at, you're going to get really robust, comprehensive training. And so that kind of, I think, for some people, demystifies the aura around consulting a little bit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I was in the healthcare management and policy major and thought I knew a lot about the healthcare system, and even after like 6 months at my job, I felt like I learned more than I would have learned in like 8 years at school. So you definitely learn a lot really quickly and gain really critical skills that I think translate well into any job moving forward. So definitely a plug for consulting, and a little bit of a plug for potentially maybe a smaller or mid-sized company is that you do get more of that opportunity to be actually client facing, whereas more of the bigger management companies like Deloitte or, name any of the big 7, but those bigger companies, you might not get that client facing time that I think at a smaller company you might get, and I definitely have gotten, and I think that really helps you grow even more quickly. So
to build on that, there's also, maybe to not plug consulting, it is very demanding. It can, sometimes the work-life balance is not really balanced. There are many sleepless nights. So, I think Georgetown has a, for better or for worse, culture of hyping it up, because there's a lot of finance bros and, people who are doing a lot of that stuff. So it's great. You get to learn a lot, but it does take a lot of effort and a lot of work. So I think, knowing what the expectation is, that, hey, my day might not end at 5, might not end at 6, right? Being acutely aware of that, I think, is important. So, hopefully, if and when you do get that job, you don't go into it thinking, oh, my first week, I'm going to go to happy hour right after. There's a give and take.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to echo off that, I would say, don't feel pressure to, go into consulting just because it's what everyone else is doing. I think I definitely kind of felt that pressure at Georgetown, just to go into like the general recruiting cycle for consulting. And I just realized it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I definitely wanted to do something that was healthcare specific. And I kind of just fell into Avaler and just really liked the culture of the company and the work they did. So that was what drove me to do eventually healthcare consulting. But I would say it's more about finding the right fit for you and not just going to consulting just because, it's what everyone else is doing and you think it's what you should be doing too.
Yeah. And I would encourage you all to use the interview process to find out if this is what you want to do. I know that right now it's a very tense time. I also graduated in the midst of a major financial crisis 10 years ago, so I can certainly relate to, really just wanting to get something, right? But I always encourage people when you go into the interview process to remember that it's a two-way street. So I interview a ton. I actually spend a fair amount of my time doing that. And it's not going to benefit me if someone comes to my firm who doesn't really want to be there. And so, use that time to ask questions, particularly if you're talking with folks who are more junior. Try to get a sense of what does their day-to-day look like? Is there any balance? I think, in any industry, work-life balance is a fallacy, honestly. I also happen to marry someone who works more than I do, so don't be a lawyer, basically, is what I'm saying. Now, I don't know that any of you are going that way, but so that helps too. It could always be worse, but ask those tough questions. Know that you're going to probably get a sugar-coated answer here or there, but so many people have been on the other side of the table and they know how important it is to be honest. And so I think if you ask enough people the right questions, you will be able to kind of walk away with a sense of, is this a place that I'll be happy at, I could thrive at.
Yeah, that's great. And Glassdoor can also give you that insight as well, so you can do some research there. Well, let's transition. It looks like we got 5 minutes. Stephanie, if you want to share some quick tips on interviewing, and in the meantime, while Stephanie's talking, if anybody has any lingering questions, do put them in the chat.
Sure. So the dreaded case interview, I think it gets much more hype than it requires. The case interview is the best way for a consulting firm to get a sense of how do you think. And so it's sort of how you should be approaching it, is the company who's making you go through this process, we want to understand how you work through a problem. I would say, few quick tips. One, practice, practice, practice. Find a friend who's also interested in consulting and just go back and forth, do cases. There's that very infamous blue book, Case in Point, I think, that has some great examples in it. Know that most firms who are focused on healthcare will probably give you healthcare specific cases. I know my firm does that, but don't feel like you need to know the background. Like, don't study different disease areas. That's not really going to be the best use of your time. In general, I remind folks that structure is really important. So don't necessarily marry yourself to a framework. I think I see that a lot where people, they memorize these frameworks that you should apply to cases. That can be helpful, but really think more broadly about structuring your thinking. So am I defining the problem? Do I have the information I need? Am I asking the right questions? Am I thinking out loud? Use your interviewer as a partner. It should be a conversation. So, generally speaking, these folks don't want to see you crash and burn. They're going to throw hints out there. They're going to, answer questions you have, try to guide you a little bit. So use them as a tool as well. And to that end, thinking out loud can be really helpful because you're bringing them along with you and they can help you course correct before you go too far down the wrong path.
And Kylie or Reza, do you have any additional insight into the interviewing process?
Sure. I think one thing when I'm interviewing folks, I like to know how they can add value to our teams. So if you have an interdisciplinary skill, like Photoshop, right? Or you're really good at video editing, right? How does that apply to consulting, healthcare consulting, right? Hey, I'm good at storytelling. I can communicate a message through graphic design and video, right? Maybe your team doesn't have that. The company doesn't have that and they really want that. So explore, I think, those interdisciplinary skills that you have and demonstrate how can I add value? What is special about you that you're really interested, you really know opioids, right? And that's a part where you're an expert in. Show how you can add value with that, or you have a certain skill. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would say coming with a few concrete examples of, projects or experience you have is really important, just so you can speak to that and really have a good conversation with the person that's in front of you. I would say a thing that makes, at least at my company, someone really successful at the lower level is someone that really takes initiative and really kind of keeps the wheels moving on projects. So any examples that you have of times that you taken initiative on things or had an innovative idea for a way to approach a problem, or, you know, kind of anything like that is really, you know, good things to prepare for an interview, just so you have those concrete examples that you come with.
The other thing I would add is what I've always heard referred to as the airport test. So to get to Reza's point around the fact that consultants work really long hours, so you're spending a lot of time with your colleagues, but you also travel, and with travel, most often comes delays. There's definitely an aspect of consulting interviews is like, do I like this person? Like, would I want to be stuck in the airport with them? I have colleagues who it took them 24 hours once to get back from North Carolina to Boston because of a snowstorm. And like the 4 of them were stuck together for 24 hours searching for toothbrushes in a airport. So there's a certain aspect of that I think comes through a little bit more in consulting than might be the case in other industries. So again, that works both ways. If you go through an interview process and you hate every person that you met with, chances are you might not want to work there. So keep that in mind and try to get a sense for these people that I want to spend, you know, so much of my precious time with and collaborate with.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I would say, I think a reason why our company might not do more of the formal interview process is because we're really trying to get a sense of who is the best fit for people to work at our company, and who would we want to work with on projects, because every single thing we do is very collaborative and we're always working in teams. So we're definitely looking for people that will fit well with us and that we will want to work with.